Hello, everyone. We are here for week 3 of our coding course. And I'm Leanne Grillat. I'm kind of your person in the background, making sure things work back here. And I am going to turn it over to Ty, and she's going to get us going on week 3.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Ty Tomasi, Director of Accessibility, Belonging, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity here at APH. And this is week 3, like Leanne said, of Introduction to Coding and Software Development. And I'm going to turn it right over to Florian Beijers to continue our study today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, a little frazzled here this week. We have several things going on. We also have the fun things about time zones that are actually a really fun topic for programming as well, because obviously time zones are time zones until they're not. And this is a week where they're not, because in the US, you guys sprung forward last week and we are doing that this week. So what the result of that is, and some people were already mentioning it on the Discord, is that the meeting is an hour earlier for me this week. So that caught me slightly off guard, but
oh my goodness, I'm so sorry about that. I forgot to remind you.
No, that's all good. I knew it. I pretty much knew, because I have people who I work with in the US that have, obviously the same problem going on. So it's pretty much been that happening all this week. Was like, oh yeah, it's an hour earlier. Damn. And
hey, and before you begin, I'm sorry, I really wanted to thank our sponsor CDW again before you start. Thanks for their grant to help us with these classes, and I appreciate you showing up an hour early, everyone.
Yeah. For all the people who aren't in the US, we have had to take it up just a little earlier, which is fine. Yeah, what are we going to do this week? A lot. And also not that much all at the same time. Yeah, we're doing quantum programming here, where we're doing one thing and the opposite thing at the same time. Because it's very much a bit more of a input centered class this week. Like, I have a couple topics that I intend to get to. And what we don't get to this week, we'll get to next week. So it really doesn't matter all that much. But there's a couple things that I think we can really easily lump together, and that's what we're essentially going to start with. This is also the class where a bunch of questions can be asked, though. So that's definitely one of the things. One of the homework that we covered this week was make a GitHub account. We may or may not get to that this week. That might be something we do next week. But what we are going to cover is the other bit of homework that I had you do, which was look into some mainstream coding thing, like a mainstream resource, and then see what you run into, like what catches your eye, as it were. Like if there's things that have been blockers, or maybe you've used the resource in the past that you just couldn't get started with because of some problem with the video, or the way it was like explained was bad, or just like it was very visual and you couldn't really follow. Like, this is super common, particularly when starting out. And actually, one of the things that this course is aiming to do is sort of bridge the gap between you and those particular courses. So yeah, this is the one thing that we're covering this week. And resources can be anything. Like, this is your Discord channels. This is your live college education. This is your videos online. This is your text-based coding courses. This is your free code camp, where everything's interactive, or everything is like sort of like tutorialized, where you do a bit of code, and then once you get past that level, if you will, you'll get to the next level and essentially just gamify the whole thing. That's becoming really popular in a lot of circles. In language learning, you'll see this in Duolingo, for example, if you've ever used that, or Bubble, which I prefer for a lot of languages. So yeah, that's essentially the main meat and potatoes of this course, this session, if you will. We'll also be doing some Python just to keep that going. Like, we're going to actually dissect the program that we looked at in lesson 1, the Rick Astley song program. I actually went through it with some of you already reasonably thoroughly, but I think there's quite a few people who might need and want to know exactly what that program actually does and how it works. Because I've very pedagogically made that file be covering a lot of really like elemental programming constructs, as it were. So we can look at some of those. And it'll be fun, and we'll have lots of laughs and lots of questions, and everything's going to be great. So for the people who haven't noticed it yet, there is a Discord for the class. Some of you have already found that your ways there, but I think 15 of you. This is completely optional. It is a really good platform to get more like interactive real-time discussions going. I've seen that the Slido was a little quiet this week. And I'm going to assume that means you guys, were so impressed by my fantastic teaching that you just didn't have any questions. If that's not the problem, definitely reach out on all the channels that the class website gives you access to. That's the Slido, that's the Discord, that's this Zoom chat, as well as, in a pinch, you can poke me on Twitter or send me an email, which some of you have also done. We also have a couple of people who I'm not sure if they're here today, but we have a couple of people who are onboarding this week. There is a few people who were not here for the first or the second lecture, or both of them. Welcome if you're here. Welcome if you're not here and you're watching it back from your lazy chair a couple days later. Cool with me. Now, I have made sure that the people who have reached out to me about this have received the emails they missed. Like some people have signed up, obviously, for the course a couple of weeks later than the course actually started, which is cool because you can just rewatch what we've done so far. And if you have a lot of time, you can also do the exercises or look at some of the resources that are on the class website. If you are a person that joined us later and did not reach out to me to get that get those emails sent out, I can absolutely do that. Just like poke me on anywhere and I'll make sure that gets done. So yeah, that's definitely something that we should be covering. I'm not sharing my screen just yet. I'm not sure how necessary it'll be this week. If we get to the GitHub stuff, I might share some. Right now, it's not necessary, so that's why there's no screen chattering in your ear at the moment. Also means that you can be liberal in using the chat. You can do that anyway, given I don't have my Zoom announcements on, so they will not interrupt other people or myself. Right, so we did a bunch of things last week. We covered mostly Visual Studio Code. We covered extensions. We covered several aspects of the code editor, Visual Studio Code. I should not speak so quickly. And then we did a little demo where I showed off several things. Before we go any further, are there questions you feel you haven't had the chance to answer, or are there questions that we didn't get to last week that you're still super curious about? Raise a hand, everyone, please. Just gonna give it like 20 seconds. Leanne, I expect you to tell me if there's...
Yep, you've got some hands raised, so
perfect.
Evan?
From last week, I was having a hard time in the emails trying to find the extension that you mentioned for Python.
Okay, it's literally called Python. If you were to type Python in the extension search bar and then tap, I believe twice, you should end up in a list. And if you press down arrow once, there should be Python right there.
Okay, that was a link. Okay, yeah, that was in the email or something like that. Okay.
Yeah, it's generally the idea is like the way that works. It's also in the class notes, but the way that works is you type the you type the search term, then you tap once or twice. I think once. You press down arrow once, and you'll be landing on the first result that's coming up from the search. And in this case, that should be Python. Then if you tap once, there should be an install button that lets you install it. So that should get you all set.
See, gotcha. Thanks.
Yep.
Next question is David.
David, what's up?
Hello. Yeah, I just have a quick question. What's the best way to get at or to access the Discord stuff? Because I've seen this on a few places now, but their interface looks a little weird. Is it better to use the desktop app or the mobile one? And also, I was a little bit confused by what the difference between, because there's Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. Do you need both of those installed, or just the?
Oh God, no.
What's the difference
No.
exactly?
So I'm pretty sure I went over this last week, but I can explain. So Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio are two very different programs that happen to share a name. They are both programming tools, but Visual Studio Code is essentially a lightweight editor, whereas Visual Studio itself, like the non-code version, is tens of hundreds of times larger and like has a bunch of like extra tools that you'll most likely not going to be using, particularly not for this class. So in our case, we want Visual Studio Code.
Yeah, I knew that, but it was just because they have a bunch of like similar sounding things is all.
Yeah.
Like the extensions and like if you install Visual Studio, it works with Python, but so does the code one. So it's not that I didn't understand what you said, but it just seemed I was looking at some stuff and
it makes a lot of sense. It's mostly a philosophical difference. So Visual Studio IDE is everything all of the time in one go, like gigs and gigs and gigs of things.
Yeah.
And they have shrunk that down a little bit. You can now install only certain workflows, but it's still going to be massively larger.
No, it's huge. Yeah.
VS Code, where VS Code is essentially an editor.
You look at VS Code, it has all like you wouldn't seem like you would need the full code, like the full Visual Studio package for almost anything, because they have extensions for everything. Like I saw like C++.
Yeah.
So
you particularly start needing the IDE for things like UI, like if you want to make like design UIs, if you want to make mobile applications and actually have like the fancy
so I was understanding
designer
it correctly.
it's just
if
like
you want to do like the prefabricated interfaces.
Yeah, like if you can get pretty close to a full featured IDE if you stuff the whole VS Code thing full of extensions. You can get pretty close.
That's why I was confused, because I was looking at this going, okay, do you actually need, like, why would somebody make the Visual Studio thing? Because there's so many extensions, I could like just install like 200 languages.
Yeah, that's very true. Visual Studio was there before Visual Studio Code, and Visual Studio Code is essentially like a way to slim that huge Godzilla of a package.
Plus it also helps you because it works on like Linux and Mac and everything else.
Right, exactly. So yeah, there's a lot of like little advantages there. Now as for Discord, Discord is a chat app that you can use from the mobile phone, from the computer, and even from the web. They're very similar experiences. The phone has only gotten more accessible recently, as far as I'm aware. So the accessibility on the desktop is more mature.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you're still new to it, I would recommend staying with the desktop version for now, and then
yeah, I was just confused.
Learn the hotkeys and use focus mode for the most part.
Yeah.
JAWS,
because I was just confused. Yeah, because it just looked like the phone app was like some people were saying. Now, does that kind of work kind of like IRC? Because I noticed they have a bunch of different servers, so you just join the ones you're interested in. And
it's similar to IRC. Yeah, just on steroids and modernized and all.
Yeah, no, looking at a lot of stuff. I've just seen it on a lot of places, and I wasn't sure. All right, thank you. I will, if I have more questions, I'll let you know, but we're good there. Thank you. I was just a little confused because I saw all these extensions to Visual Studio Code, and I'm like, well, why do we need Visual Studio exactly?
We don't.
Okay, so I'm not losing my mind.
No, you're not going insane. You're absolutely correct.
Okay.
All right.
Got one more question from Taylor.
Taylor, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're audible.
Sweet. The main question that I haven't, I don't want to say, I'm a little confused with is there a secondary package or extension that I would have to need to find to get a response? Like, for instance, Hello World, would I have to be able to plug in a certain type of script or an extension for the computer to read to me? Because I'm not sure if that has been mentioned yet or anything.
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking me, I've written code, now how do I run it in Visual Studio Code?
No, basically, let's say we make a basic Hello World, and I just want the computer to respond to me with Hello World if I hit, and then when I launch the program, I just want it to speak out Hello World. Is there a specific script or extension that I have to do, or because I'm not sure if that has been talked about yet or not?
So the code we're going to be looking at in a minute will print it to the screen, which will mean your screen will read it. So you won't need any script for that. If you want to explicitly have the computer speak irrespective of the screen reader, you're going to need a Python package to do that. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much. I think
Not a
that's all
problem.
I was really curious about. Oh, actually, one other one.
Yep.
Since I'm really busy with my colleges class and stuff,
Mhm.
I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get much of the homeworks and stuff done. Is there, like, we'll say in the summer or something, can I go then back through this stuff and do these? If I'm not
I
able
mean,
to
the
get to
homework
it?
isn't really mandatory anyway. It's particularly if you feel comfortable enough and you have the time and the inclination to do it, you can do it.
Mhm.
But you don't have to. Like, this resource is going to stay up, so you can always do it later. I'm not sure when I'll be able to get to it and check it. So it'd probably be good to poke me afterwards, like on something that isn't Slido, because I'll probably not be monitoring that after this course.
Okay.
So you can come on Discord or whatever, and then I can see and I can help you if you get stuck or anything of the sort. So yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. And just to make sure I did hear this correctly, last time I've tried playing around on Discord, wasn't really accessible anytime I tried anything, at least on desktop. And you did mention that it is more matured now and more
Oh yeah, they've
accessible.
gotten, like, if you look at it from like now and say year 2 years ago, it's night and day. It's quite a lot better now.
Okay, good. Because that was about 2 years ago since I've been trying to
Oh
get
yeah, no,
on the
it was
Discord.
garbage then.
I
It's fine
agree.
now.
Well, thank
It's
you
a
very
lot
much.
better. Like it's there's still a couple of things that could be better, but it's improved like miles. It's leaps and bounds better. So
Perfect. Well, I will stop chatting with you. Thank you very much, sir.
yep. All right. One more before we move on.
We have no more hands raised. The one
Oh.
person in the chat did ask who they're searching for Python, like who it's made by, because they found a few of them.
Who? Oh, you mean the Python extension?
I'm guessing.
Yeah, there's a couple. You're right. You want the topmost one, the 2022.2 one. I think it's by Microsoft actually. Itself. Let me really quickly verify that actually, and just make sure to not send you down a fox hunt for no reason. Python. Yeah, it's by Microsoft. It's the topmost when you search for Python. The one below that is Python for VS Code 0.2.3. It's not the one you want. You want the top one that's by Microsoft. So that's the one you want. All right. Wow, we got to everyone. Awesome. Okay. That's good. That makes us all start from the same place. Now, actually, I did say we're going to be covering Python. So what I will actually do is I will take that script from the first week and we'll go over it and explain what it does. Now, the majority of terms I'm going to be throwing around here were in the glossary for last week. A couple will not be, and those I'll explain and we'll add to the glossary for this week. I'm pretty sure also, well, that's not really important, but I'm pretty sure I will not be saying too many gobbledygook words in this particular explanation because the code is relatively basic. Just a moment. While I do that, I'm just going to talk while I do things. Because I'm super good at like my radio voice while I like make sure there's no strange things on the screen like it was the first time. Because Python is an interesting type of language. There is essentially two types of languages out there if we group them very, very, very loosely. And Python is one group, and for example, C++ is another. And I'm talking about the difference between interpreted languages and compiled languages. And the difference is essentially one you can actually really easily see in your computer. If you have what's called a compiled program, it's usually a .exe file on your computer. And well, it has been modified from the, say, human readable source code that we've seen so far into a more machine oriented kind of language. Like if you were to try to read that directly, it would be essentially ones and zeros. It'd be very hard to read. It'd be not something you'd want to do on a Tuesday afternoon. Some people do this for particular types of work, but even they will try to at least bring it back to a somewhat more human readable form before they do that. And Python, as well as JavaScript and PHP and various other languages that are a bit more common these days, are what is known as interpreted languages. And an interpreted language is essentially a language that stays in text and gets interpreted as it is read by the, well, interpreter. And this is why Python files, depending on how you open them, will do different things. If you open Python, a .py file in a notepad, you're going to see the code. Same goes for Visual Studio. If you open it in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or any other editor that lets you edit programming code or indeed any text, it will let you see the code that is in that file. Now, if you were to open it in Python, Python obviously knows how to deal with Python code. That's the whole reason it exists. So it will try to run the lines in your file one by one, sequentially, from top to bottom, essentially. Obviously, there are ways to influence how that works, and we're going to see one of them in the script that we've looked at today. But essentially, it goes top to bottom. That also means that if you have a script, like an error in your program all the way at the bottom, your program may run just fine until you get to that point where only the last line doesn't work. Or, for example, you may have a problem in a piece of the code that you're calling, that you're referring to, from higher up, and then it may not even get triggered unless something that makes sure that piece of code gets run happens. And this is actually a very common source of bugs. Someone may have put a piece of code in the code base that is excuse me, that is so unlikely to ever be run that it's not tested as thoroughly as it probably should have been. And then suddenly the universe happens and the circumstances that were never supposed to come together in order to make this code work come together. And then it turns out that, oops, we didn't foresee that this would happen. And there's various ways that can go wrong. For example, when we say something is a regression, what has most likely happened is that someone changed something. Say someone made a new feature in Windows, and by doing that, they inadvertently changed something that was already there, and now that doesn't work anymore. This is pretty common in, for example, accessibility land, where, for example, if you look at Windows 11, the Windows X menu, the quick menu, where you can, for example, open a PowerShell window or power off your computer, or do various other things, they've given that menu a makeover. But in doing so, they've actually broken something. You can no longer use first letter navigation in that menu now. And that is an oops, that's a regression. Someone didn't know that that was a thing you could do, or didn't care enough to make sure it stayed a thing you can do, and now it's no longer a thing you can do. And that's unfortunate, because usually it's accessibility problems that run into this problem. And yeah, it's unfortunately that this usually is accessibility things. Localization is another one that often breaks. If, for example, you're on a website and you see, like, say, accessibility label instead of the title on a button, or you suddenly see that an alt text is in a different language, it's very likely a line of code somewhere that someone didn't check thoroughly enough or didn't take into account, that was forgotten about. And There is ways that we're not going to go into because it's quite advanced, but there are ways to make sure this doesn't happen. For the Googlers among us, unit testing is one of them. That let you essentially make sure that when you touch something on your code base, it doesn't break something else. But there's very like different different levels of how many people are doing that and how much they're doing it. So in that sense, code can grow massively large, and the larger your code base gets, the bigger it, the more difficult it becomes to essentially keep in your grasp and make sure that when you touch one thing, it doesn't knock over something else. Kind of like a big Jenga tower, essentially. Sometimes if the code base is particularly bad, sometimes I feel like I'm on a Jenga tower and I like move one block and the whole tower might come careening down. It's not pleasant, but it does happen. Okay, while I've bored you with that story, I can now share my screen. I will do that because I'm going to look at that file we were looking at before. Gonna make sure that's open first, and then once I've done that, we can go to town. Okay, live.py. The file that I made at the very end of class 1, that's also in the homework exercise for class 1 for you to essentially comment. Some people did this and sent me their stuff. Thank you for that. That was very cool. You guys got pretty close as well. In fact, I can just use the one that's on the homework to make sure that we get the exact same version. I'm going to open it in Notepad++ because actually, no, I'm going to open it in Visual Studio Code. It doesn't really add anything to open in Visual Studio Code at this point, but we have it installed. We know how it works, so we might as well do it. I will show that off actually, because there's a pretty neat trick you can do from the command line to do that, to keep your two things in sync, and I will do that. This is where I share my screen. At least I'm going to try to. It seems to work. Nice. We're going to share my screen. Bloop. Share my sound. Lower my speech rate. And close that out and share.
Meeting controls window.
All right. Going to ask Leanne to make sure that I don't have something super embarrassing on my screen before we move on here.
At the moment, no. I
System
just
32.
see C:\\.
C Windows System 32 CMD.X. C Windows System 32 CMD.X terminal C users Florian Grader.
Perfect. All right. Well, this is our good friend, the command line. We've seen it before several times, in fact, and I cannot make this any bigger. I will make sure that the magnification in VS Code is better, but I cannot make this any bigger. I'm going to open my Dropbox folder because that's where I stored that homework exercise. We've covered this last week. We can do this with the command cd followed by the name of the folder. So I will do that with cd
space
Dropbox. So we've done cd Dropbox, pressing enter.
C users Florian Dropbox Grader.
And that line has changed. We're now in the Dropbox folder. It says C users Florian Dropbox, no longer C users Florian. We can see that we're now in that new folder. And that prompt is a really good way to see where you are, because that's your focus. That's where, if you were to be in Windows Explorer, that would be the folder you've just opened, as it were. If you press enter on a folder, you're now in that folder. And CD is the equivalent of that in the command line. You're now looking at the Dropbox folder. Now, if I were to type ls, or on Windows, it would be dir. It would show us a whole lot of things that I have in my Dropbox, and we're not going to do that because I haven't sanitized that, and it's probably going to show me like really bad accountant reports from last year or something. So let's not do that. I know what the file is called. So what I can actually do is two things here. In the first lesson, I explained that the command line looks for programs when you type a command. Like if you type a command, it's going to look through several folders to see if it knows what where that command is. And one command is going to be like, hey, that's me, and it's going to like execute. And Visual Studio Code, when you install it, is one of those programs. You can use the word code to refer to Visual Studio. So we'll do that.
CODE code space.
And the argument, which we covered last week as well, the argument for this command is the file name it needs to work on, or the folder it needs to work on. Visual Studio Code can open an entire folder at once. in which case your Explorer view with Control-Shift-E would populate, and you would be able to manage and look through the files in that Explorer view, which is a tree view. We're not doing that this time because we're only looking at one file. What we are going to show off, though, is the command line autocomplete, which is pretty useful for a lot of reasons. I will type the first couple of letters of this file. The file's called live.py because I was making it live and it was a Python file. So live.py seemed apt. I will type liv just to start with.
L-I-V.
Now, this is a pretty contrived example, but you can do this for a lot of things. If I press the tab key now,
V-I-L space E-D-O.
then something went wrong, of course,
Meaning
because
control.
this is demo.
Florian
Let
Beijers.
me see what
Florian
happened
Beijers.
here.
O-X-Ox. Items view list. Link V. Lingiosa 40.
Okay, it's
Windows
not
System
there.
32
Okay,
CMD.
so
Meaning C. Windows C. Windows
I made a mistake and I forgot where I put the folder. So
C.
it's
D. C.
actually
D. E.
my
U.
public
P. L. I. C.
folder.
The system cannot find the path specified. C. Users Florian Dropbox Creator.
I need to move into my public folder
C.
first. I will try to not talk
C.
over the screen
CD
here.
space E. U. B. L. I. C. C. Users Florian Dropbox Public Creator.
So we have done CD public to go into the public folder. Again, that line, that prompt that says C users Florian Dropbox is now Dropbox public. There's backslashes in between these bikes, for example, by the way. Let me actually turn up my punctuation so you can hear that better.
Symbol level most.
It's there. If I just read this line
230.
again with, I'm using NVDA's screen review here, caps lock up and down to read the output of what the command line is doing. In JAWS, you would want to use the JAWS cursor because if you just use your up and down arrow keys, you're going to go through your command history instead.
C: /users /Florian /Dropbox /public creator.
There you go. So that's what it actually says. There is colon backslashes between those things, just like you would in any other site. This is just a file path that you would use for anything. If you were to paste this into the run dialog, you would go straight to the Dropbox folder. The file paths are absolute ways to get to a particular place on your computer. Absolute, as in you start from the beginning and you move your way all the way to the end, rather than relative, where you, for example, say, if I'm already in users Flori, I can just say that I want to cd the space Dropbox /public, and it's going to understand that I mean go to Dropbox /public from where I am now. So if I don't give it an entire path, you can shorten this by just doing it like that. We've shortened it even more by splitting it up into two commands, cd Dropbox, and then after that we did cd public to go into the public folder. And I just make sure that this works.
CD dot C: /users /Florian /Dropbox creator.
Another one that's really useful to show off is CD and then a double dot. So dot twice, CD space dot dot. That goes up one folder. It's actually quite useful to do sometimes.
CD
So I'll do it again to go back to my user folder.
C: /users /Florian creator. CODOLIVE.py.
Okay. So what I just did was what I was intending to do. Apparently I stored this and I forgot where I stored it. It doesn't really matter right now. I can show it off anyway. So we'll start off again with code.
CODE. Code space.
And we'll do LIV.
LIV.
And now if I press the tab key, this time no ding, please.
E.py.
Thank you. It auto-completes with E.py. And it does that because that's the only thing it can think of I could mean. I've typed like so many characters of the first, like of the beginning of that file name, that it's just going to know, oh, you mean this one. And now if I were to press enter now.
Live left parent, one right parent, .py Visual Studio Code, live.py Visual Studio Code document, application, extensions list, main landmark, live.py editor as autocomplete multi-line import us.
That was a whole lot of irrelevant information. But what we care about is that live.py was opened. And we are now in that file. There's several other files open. We're not going to mess with those at the moment. We're just going to look at this one with this one file for now. And that's going to be a Python crash course, as it were. Now,
Import time.
We're just gonna read through the code one line by one line. First, I'm going to be quiet and let Eloquence do the talking for a second, just so we can like refresh our memory on what's actually here right now.
Import us.
So what I'm doing is literally just going through the file with the down arrow key. Every time the line finishes, I'm going to press the key again. The beeps you're about to hear are NVDA's indent reporting feature that tell us how far a line is indented, which in Python is pretty important. But let's look at this code first.
Import us. Import time. Counter equals 10. Print left parent, quote right, let's count down colon, quote right parent. While counter greater 0 colon. Print left parent, str left parent, counter right parent, plus quote elephants, quote right parent. Time dot sleep left parent, 1 right parent. Counter dash equals 1. Lang. Us dot start file left parent, quote never dot mp3, quote right parent.
Okay. Awesome.
Lang. Us dot start lang.
That's the entire file. That's the entire, how many lines do we have? When you do Control G in Visual Studio Code, you get a go to line dialog. And due to a suggestion of myself, it'll also tell you what line you are on. This is generally something you don't really need to know about all that much as a screen reader user. Not enough to have it be prepended to every sentence for every line. So we've come up with the alternative that if you need that, you can press Control G as if you were to go to a different line, and it'll tell you what line you're currently on, which is then something you can just know and dismiss again if you don't want to move. So if I press Control G, it's going to tell me a couple of things.
Current line colon 11, character colon 1, type a line number between 1 and 11 to navigate to. Combo box has autocomplete editable colon.
So in 11 lines, we do quite a bit of things. We import a couple things, we print some text to the screen, then we do something 10 times, we count down, and then we play the random song by Rick Astley. So how does this actually work? Let's go here through this line by line and just see what everything does.
Main landmark, live.py editor as autocomplete multi-line.
Hush. We're going to go up to the top to that first statement.
Us.start file left land.
I said,
import us.
There we go. This computer does not have a home key. Import OS. Now, imports in Python actually relate to the question we got just now about how to make the computer speak. Python on its own has a pretty what they call batteries included philosophy, where a lot of the things you might need are already included in what's called the standard library. So there's a lot of extra bits of, like, let's say Lego bricks of programming that you can just sort of take from the Lego box and just use in your own project. And OS and time are two of those bricks. Import essentially says, make everything that's available in this package or module available to me, as I'm going to be needing it soon. So OS deals with several things that have to do with the operating system we're on, and time does time-related things, and we're going to be seeing some of those in later lines. So import is just that. It just tells someone, like, I'm going to need something from this bit of code soon. I'm just telling you beforehand so you make sure you have it available, yeah? And that's what imports are. Now, if you need more functionality, and this is where Python really opens up, and a lot of other languages do as well, you can get other packages off the web. You can use a system called pip for that. I think I hinted at it last week. Pip is a tool that searches PyPy, the Python package index. That's the PYPI. And you can, for example, do pip install blah, like the name of the package that you found. And you can find those on Google, or you can find them in, well, PyPy, which you can freely search through. You can find them on GitHub. There's all sorts of places where you might find things you can get from pip. And pip are sometimes you'll have packages you can use. Sometimes they're entire programs. Sometimes you can literally just download a command off pip and use it in your terminal or your command line. For the majority of you, pip should already just work if you followed the course so far. If you were to run, just open a command line shell and type pip, PIP, it should give you some output. If it tells you the command isn't recognized, then come see me because something went wrong. An alternative, if it doesn't work, I don't think this is necessary for any of you, but if it doesn't work, you can try pip3. So PIP and the number 3. And if that doesn't work either, then yeah, something went sideways and we have to figure out what broke. But this is where you would find things that are considered too niche to be in the standard library. For example, making the computer speak. There is, from memory, there's a package called pytts, which will let you use the Windows 1 core voices to say text. If you have Windows 10, those are the 1 core voices NVDA also uses. And there is another package that uses the Google Translate API, and I'll cover an API in a second, to essentially synthesize speech from that voice and then speak it, which is a bit harder. That actually is quite a bit more advanced because you need to do several things to make that work properly, but it can be done. And I can show you as a code snippet on how to do it. But that would be where you start using pip to get packages that the standard library doesn't give you access to. And then you would import them this exact same way. You would import package you just imported, or you just downloaded from pip, and it should work at that point. A good way to test that is to use the REPL, the read, evaluate, print loop that we used last week to do the MyString example. Now, at the top here, we're saying OS and time.
Import time.
And you can actually recognize where we're using those, because Python, one of the things that Python likes to do is be very explicit about what it's doing and where it's coming from. So when you, for example, want to use something from those packages, you would have to mention them first, like you do package dot followed by something that may or may not be in that package. And we're going to see a couple of examples of that in just a moment, but foreshadowing. Let's continue onwards.
Counter equals 10.
Counter equals 10. Now, this should be familiar to some of you. We've done a similar thing last week. This is a variable declaration. So we're saying make the value 10 be referred to by the name counter and keep track of it. We have made a variable called counter with the value of 10 is how we usually say it. The equal sign is not really an equals here, but more of an assignment character. So assign 10 to counter is a good way to read this into your head like that. All right, so we have 10 stored in memory, labeled as counter that we may need later. Let's see what else we do here.
Print left parent, quote right, let's count down, colon, quote right parent.
All right, let's count down. So that's literally just a bit of text. It's a string. So it's a list of characters in 2 quotes, like we covered last week. It's a string that just gets printed, and print is known as a function. A function is a mini program that does something and spits something out. Like in the class notes, we use the example of a magic spell turning a human into a toad. So the spell is the function, the human is the argument, and the return value, the thing that the function gives back, is the toad. Well, don't think anyone wants that function, but hey, if you were to make a function like that, that's how it would work. And in this case, this function doesn't return anything. It does something. It makes sure text happens on the screen. In this case, hello. What does it say? Let's count down.
While print left parent, quote all right, let's count down, colon, quote
All
right
right,
parent.
let's count down. Yeah, right. So far, we've been going sequentially. Like everything's been going from one line to the next. And we haven't really seen Python needing to deviate from that path. Now, the next line is going to show off how that would work, because we're going to look at something called a loop.
While counter greater 0, colon.
A loop is essentially a way to repeat a piece of code an X number of times. So you can say, until I'm done. You can even say to your friend, like, hey, while I'm still doing up my shoes, please wait. So that's essentially a wait action that gets repeated until you are done tying your shoes. And that's essentially how a loop works. You're giving it some kind of condition, like while counter in this case is greater than 0. So as long as counter, the value that's in counter doesn't go below 0, do this thing, do these things. That's what a loop does. You have a condition, and until that condition is false, so until that's no longer the case, that bits of code will keep repeating. So that's why we call it a loop, because the code goes around in a loop. It checks the condition. Is counter still bigger than 10? Yes. The value of greater than 0, sorry. Yes, counter is currently 10, so it's greater than 0. All right, let's do the thing that it tells us to do if that were to be the case. And then once it comes back around, once it's done all that, we're going to go back to that line and go and check, hey, is counter still greater than 10? Greater than 0? Yeah, it is. Okay, let's do it again. And if I were to make sure that I didn't change the value of counter, this loop would run forever, because it's always going to be the case that 10 is greater than 0. Foreshadowing again. We're going to cover and how I would make sure that doesn't happen in just a couple of lines here. But yeah, that's what a loop is. And we are about halfway through here. I'm going to pause for just a second so people can ask questions if there are any.
6:45.
We're doing pretty good on time too.
So we've had some questions from early on, so we'll see if they still have their question. Their hands are still raised. The first is from Dilip, D-I-L-I-P.
Yeah, Dilip, go ahead.
So actually,
oh, you just cut out there. Or did I?
No, they did. You have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Now we
Yeah,
can.
we hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had a question about the last session. Actually, I was not able to connect Visual Studio Code and Python. I kept trying select interpreter, and somehow in fact, I was not even able to find the Python installation. I went into the directory where it was supposed to be installed under the program files, and I just couldn't see the name Python, but I know it is installed because
it might be in program. You can do where Python in a command line, and you can see the exact path of where your interpreter is. That might be a way to fix that.
Okay, so I just tried select, because it seemed like such a simple step. It just
normally it should find your Python distribution by itself. If it's not doing that, you may need to help it along by giving it like a custom path. And you can do that by like going into a terminal window, like a command line window, and typing where. So just the word WHERE, where, and then Python. And if that gives you back where Python is, you can use that path. If that doesn't work, come find me, because then something broke.
Okay, good. And one quick question. At the top of this script that you are describing, there's an import time. What does that do?
That imports a module called time, which lets us do various time-related functions. We're going to see, I'm going to be only using one of them, and we're going to see it in just a couple of lines.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
We have one more question from Donnie.
Donnie.
What languages do they come in?
Excuse me?
What languages do they come in?
Do what come in?
Python.
In English?
If you mean the keywords, it generally comes in English. Yeah.
Okay. That's all that was in there.
Okay, great. So I can continue. Awesome. So
counter greater 0:.
We have the loop, and the loop is, as you can hear by the beeps,
Left parent, str left parent, counter right parent,
indented, and indentation in Python is important. there is various ways that programming languages indicate what's known as a block. So a number of statements that go together that essentially are, you could see it as confined into a sort of a block kind of idea. So you open it up, you do the thing you need to do, and then you close it again. And a loop is a block, so is a function, so is a lot of other things. So in Python, you use indentation to indicate that. So if you ever get errors about your indentation not being correct, that is something to look into, because that will actually make sure your program doesn't work. Indentation does happen in other programming languages as well. And in that sense, it's mostly a stylistic thing. And in that case, your colleagues will crash rather than your Python interpreter, because at that point, if you don't use indentation, it will be very difficult for particularly visual readers to read your code, and that would be trickier. Speaking of, is my letters in my editor big enough? Can everybody see it? Because I can make it a bit larger if that's necessary. Leanne, that's
pretty
mostly
good,
one.
actually.
Okay, perfect. So it didn't change from last time. Great. Nice. So, like I said, you do need to indent your code. And indent, for people who don't know what the term means, is essentially making your code a couple of spaces away from the edge of the editor, from the left edge. So you have a few spaces and then you start typing. This is essentially done to really quickly visually indicate that things belong together and are at a certain level of blocks, as it were. Like this loop here starts off with a colon.
While counter greater 0 colon.
And then if we go down the lines, we're not going to describe them just web, but if we go down.
Print left parent, time.sleep left parent, counter dash equals 1.
These are all on the same indentation level. They are all indented by
space, C. Oh.
4 spaces, which is pretty common.
Blank.
And then here's a blank line that's not indented. This is the end of that loop. And you can very easily see that when you skim it visually. Also, if you use a braille display, it's very easy to see. And then if you don't use either of those, you have these beeps.
Counter dash equal time print left parent, while print left parent, str left parent,
So
counter right parent, plus quote elephants, quote right parent.
So you can scroll through the code without having to hear the entire line, and you can instantly see, oh, this belongs together, and I don't need to see anything about this right now, so I can just skip right by it without having to hear the entire bit of code. And these super tiny productivity things are super important, because once you start working as a coder, as a programmer, you're going to do this all the time. And like, this might save you only a couple of seconds if you do it once, but if you do this like 500 times, that's a lot of seconds you're saving. And it's very helpful to have this on when you're coding for that reason. And also that's why you want to indent your code if you work with other people, because they're expecting you to. And if you were to make a pull request to your product you're working on as a coder, and you don't have this worked out, you'll probably get grumbles from your colleagues telling you, hey, you should indent your code. Well, we're all doing Python, so you do have to do that anyway, otherwise your code doesn't work. So this is just essentially, Python has enforced this, where other languages very, very, very strongly encourage it. It's a minor but important difference. Now, this is where things get a little bit more meta, because we get a line that's essentially calling a function within a function. And that's a little bit tricky to explain. If this doesn't make sense to you yet, it doesn't really matter. The idea is that we have an inner function call and an outer function call. Like a call in this case means we're using a command that triggers that particular function. And a function, like I said, is a thing that needs something to work on, and then it spits out something that it's essentially the result of that being worked on. Kind of like how a command works on the command line. So you give it arguments, and it gives you a return value, which you use to, for example, do more things to that return value. And that's essentially what happens here. So the print function,
print left parent,
here it is
str
again.
left parent, counter right parent, plus quote elephants, quote right parent.
the print function doesn't like it if you use numbers and strings in the way I have been doing here. So what I'm doing is
counter greater 0 colon.
we have the value of counter, which is currently set to 10. So this function, what this does, if I describe it in words, so this
Print left parent, str left parent, counter right parent, plus quote elephants, quote right parent.
It takes the value of counter, which is at this point 10, and it adds it to the phrase elephants with a space in between. So if you were to run this line of code, it would print 10 elephants at this point, because the value of counter is momentarily 10, and the word elephants is essentially tacked onto the end of the word 10, the variable 10, which is a number, and that's the big issue here. Like, you can use the plus character to either add two numbers together, like you would do on a calculator, like 10 plus 10 equals 20, or you can use it to essentially tack one string onto the end of another, like put two strings together in a difficult word that is called concatenation, and that'll be in the glossary. But concatenation, or like adding strings together, is essentially the same. Like you're adding one thing to another. Just, you know, in a number you get a new number, and with strings you would get a longer string. You would get the value of the first string added to the value of the second string. Now, the problem here is that one is a number and one is a string. So we can't do that. Python doesn't know if one should be a number or the other one should be a string. You can't just add an apple to an orange and expect it to work. And that's why we have this inner thing called str, which says, hey, take this thing, take this value and turn it into a string first. So we're turning the value of counter into a string, in this case 10, and then we're adding that to the other string, which is space elephants. And at that point we have 10 elephants. Now, like I said, that is a bit tricky to follow. You might not be immediately understanding how that works, and that's completely cool. This will come up now and again, but I will make a complete flow of how this happens in the notes. So if you're not quite following along right now, it's completely fine. You're not missing anything. You'll be able to get plenty of time to look at it at your own leisure, at your own speed, and I'll be here to answer questions, of course. But for the moment, we're going to move on to the end of the loop. And then once we've to the end of the loop, we're going to answer some questions again, because this is somewhat dense material, and I do want to make sure we're not leaving people behind. The next line in this loop.
Time.sleep left parent, one right parent.
Time.sleep. There is the time that we imported up at the top. We're saying time.sleep, and then with the argument 1. Sleep is a function that the time module gives us, and we're getting the time module stuff because we're doing import time at the top. So now we get to use the sleep that's on time, and sleep essentially pauses the program for the amount of seconds that we define as an argument. So at this point we have 1, so 1 second, and then keep going. And I've done that to give, you know, speech more of a chance to actually read out the line, and then make sure that the song doesn't start playing in the middle of us still listening to elephants being counted. So we have that big, that tricky string that we just did where it says 10 elephants. Now we have time.sleep 1, wait for 1 second.
Counter dash equals 1.
And here is my security for making sure this loop does end at some point. Counter dash equals 1, which means take whatever is in counter right now remove 1 from it, and then store that value back into counter. So counter was 10, we're doing dash equals 1, now counter is 9, and the loop ends here. It goes back to the top.
Top print left parent, while counter greater 0 colon.
And it checks again, is counter greater than 0? Yes, it is now 9, but it is still greater than 0. And then we do this whole thing all over again. And I think this is a good moment to, again, check for raised hands. Do we have questions?
I am not seeing any raised hands at the moment. Oh, I got one. Let's see.
Let's say I'm on fire today. But okay.
Dylan?
As we wait for questions, I just want to say thanks again to our sponsor, CDW, for helping us with this program.
And Dylan's
Yay,
hand is
thank
down.
you,
Khalid?
No,
Oh,
my hand was from
Oh.
previous before.
Okay,
so thank
okay,
you. But
thank you.
I do understand programming, and I'm very impressed with how easy the instructor is making this, even though the course itself is very hard for me. So again, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, Khalid.
Khalid.
Unmute. Yep. Hi. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go for it.
Okay, perfect. Let me check. There is a line that ends with the colon. Let me look up that line.
Yes. there is.
Why do we have a colon here?
So the colon starts the block.
Is that necessary in Python?
Yes, that's a Python thing. So where, for example, in C++ or C#, you would see a condition and then a left brace, and then you do your things, and you do a right brace to end the block. Python does a colon and then everything indented, and then when the indentation ends, the block also ends. So colon is just a Python syntax thing.
So if I forgot the colon, am I going to get an error?
Yes, you'll get yelled at very loudly. I'll be like, no, I don't know what this is. Syntax error.
Okay, and the dot sleep parenthesis 1, does that mean that it's 1 second between each count? So 10, 1 second, and 9, 1 second, so on?
Yep, because what we're doing right after the dot sleep 1 is we're only decrementing that counter. We're making it 1 less, and then we start to loop over again. So that removing 1 from the counter and then doing the print again, that takes like a couple of milliseconds. So the time dot sleep makes sure there is a second in between those 10 countdowns.
So if it's 2, it will be twice, like double the time, 2 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. I will play around with these values to see how different.
Yeah, sure. You can absolutely just change things that are in there and see what happens. You can't break it. Well, you can break it, but then it'll just give you an error.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yep. Anybody else?
Alan?
Yes, I thought I heard you say that the command was counter dash equals 1, and I'm having a hard time understanding the logic, because I would think counter should equal counter minus 1, or
yeah.
I know dash is a minus, but and one other thing before I finish, how can I download this live.py file that I can look at the code that's in it at my leisure here at home? Because
that's in the homework for session 1. All the way at the bottom of that page, there's a homework session which has a link in it that you can click to get that file.
Oh, that's okay. All right. And so explain this last command we just, the dash
equals. So the dash equals or minus equals, if you will, they're the same, is what's known as a compound operator. So what dash equals is short for is counter equals counter minus 1.
Ah, okay. Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. So you could also do plus equals 1 to make it bigger, star equals something to make it multiply, and all sorts of things. So that's what that does.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Cool. Well,
Semrawit.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Regarding the indentation, are we supposed to press 4 spaces for the indentation all the time, or it depends on something else?
So VS Code will 9 out of 10 times do this for you. If it notices, oh, you just pressed a colon, so you're probably going to want to do a block. It's going to, like when you press enter, going to make these indentations for you. Keep an eye on that, because you may like put spaces where there's already spaces enough. But yes, like you may at times need to press spaces, and generally it's 4 spaces per level. So say I was doing this loop within a function, we would not have 4 spaces, we would have 8 spaces. So it depends on how like deep you go, as it were, how deeply nested we are in the code.
Thanks.
No problem.
Martin?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yay. What do you prefer? Do you prefer using the tab key, or do you prefer the spaces? Because I find if you're using Braille and you're down 3 levels, you're up to 12 spaces there. So I'm just wondering, what's your preference?
The problem is that it's often not up to you. When you work on projects that are already there, you kind of have to go with what they're using.
Yeah.
And most, if not all of the time, it's going to be spaces. I do get your point though, like tabs will take less space on a Braille display. But this is so common that even you can even set Visual Studio to insert 4 spaces when you press the tab key. So it's like you can do your own thing, and if you're using your own project, you can absolutely do that. Python isn't going to care as long as there is indentation. But yeah, the PEP 8 I think even says PEP is a Python enhancement proposal. It's essentially where you define things like this. How should Python best be written? It's a fun little rabbit hole if you're really bored to go look into. But I think even there it says use 4 spaces for indentation levels. So that's what people usually go with. But yes, you're right. It does take quite a bit of space on Braille display. Having an 80-cell Braille display, if you can afford it, which I don't think any of you will be able to because they're ridiculously expensive, but if you can get one, it's a lifesaver. Unfortunately, I can't use mine currently because I'm using like several computers at once, and mine only connects to one at a time. But yeah, it does help in these situations. If you're like 5 levels deep, that's 20 characters of just nothing.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem. Anything else? Anyone else, rather?
Amy?
Hi.
Hello.
My question was, where can we see documentation for the functions being called from things like the time or OS? So time.sleep is clearly some kind of a function that I think function is the term I want.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Where do we get documentation on what those little blocks do? I mean, start file was obvious, but sleep, I think, is obvious, but I'd like to check those things.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of ways you can do it.
C:\Windows C:\Windows/system 32/CE Y-T-H-O-N Python 3.10.
And now I need to think of this myself. Or just, is it help?
H-E-L-P. Help left parent E-I-S-L-E-E-P. Sleep right parent trace back left parent. Most recent name error : name time is not defined.
Oh.
I-M-P-O-R-T import space.
So I'm in the what I just did. I opened the command, the Python interpreter, the REPL. And now if I retrace my steps here and I do import time.
I-M-P-O-R-T import T-I-M-E. Greater.
We now have time. If I now do help.
H-E-L-P. Help
and I put time in the parentheses here.
T-I-M-E. Time right parent. Help on build dash in module time : name time dash. This module provides various functions to manipulate time values. Description: there are 2 standard representations of time. One is the number of seconds since the epoch. And UTC left parent. .k data GMT right.
Blah 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 blah. So you can use that. You can use that command to essentially type what you're looking for. Like we can also do this for sleep.
Dash more dash dash.
I'm gonna quit out of it. You can press Q. If it's too much text, you can press Q to stop. If I were, for example, to do help time.sleep, we should
E-L-P. Help left parent E-I-M-E. Time S-L-E-E-P. Sleep right. Help on build dash in function. Sleep in module time : sleep left parent right parent. Sleep left parent. Seconds right parent. Delay execution for a given number of seconds. The argument may be a floating point number for sub-second precision. Greater.
There you go. It tells you exactly what it is. Now, if that's too annoying, what you can also do
Live.py.
And this is where Visual Studio Code's more like clever features come
While
in.
counter greater print left parent. Time dot sleep left counter dash equals 1 time dot sleep left parent. MEE.SLEEP left 1 right line space.
Just going
Line
to go make a new line here. If I do time dot
me dot. Also not selected 2 of 30. Time not selected. Time not selected 4. Daylight not selected 5. Deadline clock line info. Time not selected 7 of 38.
I get all these suggestions what I might mean. I can use the arrow keys to just go through my suggestions, and it can be a really quick way to see what functions does this time thing even have.
Local time not selected 8 of 38.
And then if you press Control space.
Time local time docs colon graph hyphen local time colon left parent 6 colon float bar none equals right parent dash greater struct line time graph dash local time left parent backslash left bracket seconds backslash right bracket right parent dash and gt semi left parent tm backslash line here tm backslash line mod.
Yeah, unfortunately that's a pretty long one, but that'll also give you a lot of documentation on what parameters you can give it and how it works. So that's another way to get to that same or similar information. I do recommend having that off most of the time. Control space is a toggle, so you can like turn it on, listen to the things, and turn it back off. Because if you have that on all the time, it's going to give you so much output, you won't know where your left ear is from your right. It's not fun.
Real loud.
Right. So yeah, you can do it with the help command in the interpreter, or you can do it with Visual Studio Code. There's several ways to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Or you can Google it. That works too.
That's always legit.
Yep. Anybody else? No?
I'm seeing a hand, but I've got to find the person. There we go. Brian.
Okay, Brian, go ahead. You may need to unmute yourself as you're currently not audible.
His microphone unmuted, but we are not hearing him, so it's not.
Okay, your audio may not be working. Can you send in the chat? Make sure that we get your question answered. In the meantime, maybe it's a good thing to move on. Is there another person that has questions, or was that the last one?
Nope, that was it. That's the last one.
All right. Well, while we wait for Brian's question, just like that, we've pretty much gone through this entire script. There's only one more line left, and then we've covered the whole thing. How are we doing on time?
7:11 p.m.
Pretty good. I'm going to hold off on that line, and I'm going to ask you all to actually write in to give me your obstacles that you ran into when looking at courses. You can do that either by raising your hand again and just speaking out, or you can just send in the chat and then Leanne can be secretary. It depends on what you feel best comfortable with. I'm good either way.
Time not selected 9 monotonic line NS not selected 11 of 38. Live
not
editor.
view all the time. There we go.
David has raised his hand.
Okay, David, go ahead.
Okay, just a lot of things I run into because I've the reason I'm taking this course is because I come from I learned Python and C and stuff in Unix, but I don't know anything about Windows development. So this is where I'm taking the class. And what I run into a lot is you get these books and they'll tell you to type a command or something, but it'll be a screenshot or an image or something of a running program. And it's like, how do you deal with, I've seen that in a lot of this, particularly the Windows like API ones. There's a lot of these things where they just give you a screenshot and it's like, what do you do in that case? Or is you just find a different resource?
It's difficult. Yeah, there's a couple things you can do. You have your screen reader's OCR functionality. So what I usually do in that case is I will focus it on that image, do an OCR, which is an optical character recognition that you can do with NVDA and with JAWS, and it'll try to extract text from the screenshot. Now, obviously, this isn't always going to be very clear. You wouldn't want to do this on an invoice because you might miss a 0, and that's usually not good either for you or the other person. But for programming, I found that at least gives you a clue on what it might be trying to do. And then from there, you can usually plug that code into your IDE or your code editor and maybe see if the autocomplete can figure out what you were trying to do, and then you have a resource as well. If that doesn't work, then yes, it's usually best to try to Google it as specifically as possible. Like, I'm trying to do this function for this particular module. And then usually there'll be someone who either wrote a blog post on it, or there is like an MSDN article that you can look at for maybe more textual instructions. But yeah, this does happen.
I'll have to play with that, because I'm interested in helping out with some development projects, and I was just trying to get a hold of how to deal with some of the Windows program, and I keep seeing a lot of these screenshots. I'm just like, okay, this is not helpful. But I didn't realize OCR would do a sane job on this. I don't know why I never thought to hit the OCR command on that. So good tip, thanks.
Really depends on the font. Like, sometimes it'll work great, sometimes it'll not work at all. It's very hit and miss. But if it does work, it can like help you out out of a tight spot sometimes.
Yeah, you can get lucky, but
yeah,
I guess you don't know unless you
honestly,
try.
I've gotten this to work on, like, I do a lot of penetration testing training as well, like hacking, and sometimes you need to use RDP, like a Windows remote connection. Obviously, that's not going to have a screen reader installed.
No,
and I managed to use
OCR.
Yeah, I managed to use OCR to install a backdoor on a running machine and get access to it. So
nice.
It can be quite useful.
Nice. I should
helpful.
attempt OCR more things. I've also noticed that the screen recognition and the stuff on iOS is extremely useful. They really up their
it can
game
be
on
super
that.
useful. It can actually really be useful sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't work at all again, but
yeah,
it
right.
can absolutely be a lifesaver for some applications. Yep.
Yeah, but I don't know why I never thought of that. That's
well, this is why we're here. This is why we're
okay, good.
Tips.
This is why okay. Thanks.
Exactly.
You're great. But by the way, your explanations are extremely human readable as somebody that understands a little bit of what's going on. You've managed to make it simple enough and yet not left out any of the important stuff. So congratulations.
I appreciate it. I try hard. So
I like that example of a function that you gave for it. It's like, okay, that's a good example for people that have never seen it before.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Just thought I would congratulate you on that, because you don't see a lot of really well designed courses like this. So good job.
Thank you. That's awesome to hear. Leanne, in the meantime, do we have
yes, we do.
Our question from
I was able to answer it. He was asking if you covered some VS last week, and I said yes, it's in the video.
Oh yeah, it is. Okay. Yeah, then we can go to the next person.
Abdullah.
Hi all, can you guys hear me, or am I not audible? Okay, good. Apart from the things already mentioned, I think that I speak for myself, sorry. As Abdullah, I think that I need more practical examples, more hands-on approach, because it's fine for me to read textual descriptions, and I want to reiterate the problems that they already mentioned. Visuals, basically, they already mentioned that, images and screenshots and what have you. But like what I'm saying is, like, I think that I need more practical examples. Like, I need to be told, hey, your homework for next week is gonna be like, I don't know, like clone a repository. By the way, Florian, I think I'm not sure if you mentioned that before I came in, because I kind of came in like 5 minutes late because of my internet. But I was able to clone a repository from VS Code, and it was accessible. So yeah.
Very good. Awesome.
Yeah. So that's what I like. I want, I think, for me at least, that's what I feel comfortable. I feel like if I don't do anything from what I have learned, if I didn't basically use the knowledge that I learned, if I didn't apply it rather, I think I would forget it. And
that makes a lot of sense.
That's a problem, that's a very big, humongous problem for me. Ginormous,
That's great.
So yeah, that's about it.
we're currently in the session where we're like essentially talking about mainstream resources that may have like some accessibility issues. What it sounds like to me would be really helpful for you would be some of the coding resources that are on the second session's notes page. There's several ones linked there. One is educative, one is free code camp, and they're both very.
I actually signed up for educative like just a couple of days ago, so yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna like those because essentially it's gonna tell you a thing and then it's gonna show you, okay, this is how you do the thing. Now go do the thing.
Does it have homeworks? Like, do you get to do like things like make a file or something?
It's you essentially have editors on the page and you're just supposed to change the code and like make it do a certain thing, pretty much as you're reading.
Mm-hmm.
And those editors are accessible. You're using the VS Code Monaco editor, so you can use those. So yeah, I think that might be really right up your alley there.
Yeah. I will also I'm currently like trying them out. So yeah, I think they're accessible as you said. Yeah. So thanks. I just wanted to point that out. Just more absolutely. Like a hands-on approach, as I said. But yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Got Jasmine.
Hello.
Hello.
So something that I've realized, as a master's degree student, I had to use a lot of like college websites and things like that. And it is mainly a visual thing. They have us do these trainings. One of them was Not Anymore, I believe. It's like just one of the trainings that they do against bullying and, violence and things like that. And one of the trainings they had us do was super inaccessible. And they literally had to create a more accessible website because it's all so visual. They want you to, drag and drop things. They want you to, look at the pictures and access the next button. And so that's something that arises a lot for me, is that the check boxes don't work, or the radio buttons don't work correctly or read correctly. And I've gone through a lot of that, and that's definitely a coding issue, I believe, that people need to look at from an accessibility standpoint.
So yeah, there's several things there that you mentioned. There is a point where a course is so incredibly inaccessible that there's just no point doing it. Unfortunately, this does happen a lot. For example, Try Hack Me is a pen testing training platform that I use, and it's pretty accessible actually. They've not really done their homework. They've not explicitly made it accessible, but they've been accessible accidentally a lot of the time. And then they're one most like beginner friendly. This is where you start. This is like the first thing that you would want to do if you have literally no zilch experience. That has inaccessible classes in it. And I'm like, guys, no, why?
Oh, geez.
They have the thing where you say you have to click a certain image, or you have to drag one image to another. And unfortunately, that is super visually satisfying because you're like, drag it, drop it. Yay, it works. Awesome. And there is an instant gratification element to that. And that's what a lot of learning resources like. So they do like to go for these kinds of interactions. Obviously, they're not accessible by default. And if that is the problem, there is honestly not a whole lot you can do. Like, you have to flag it. You have to tell them you're inaccessible. And then, yeah, you're going to have to find someone to help you with it, or you're going to have to find a different resource. Now, the other issue where you can't click buttons, that's usually fixable, at least up to a point. You can use OCR, again, like I said, to the other person. Sometimes that'll at least let you get to, say, a next button or a finish button, because usually they'll have the word next on it. Now, not always. Sometimes it's just an arrow, in which case you're essentially hosed. But there will at times be bits of text you can click with the mouse using the mouse keys of your screen reader. JAWS has the mouse follow the JAWS cursor. So if you do an OCR with JAWS, you can literally just hit the left mouse button key on the word and it should click it. And this may also work for radio buttons and checkboxes. On those, if like it does say the text, but it doesn't say checkbox, it just says clickable, you can probably get away with just hitting enter on them and it'll still work. You just can't see that they work. Like,
yeah, you just can't tell that it's actually.
They'll visually turn on, but you can't see that. So you'll just have to hope that when you press the next button, it actually sends it. Usually if it doesn't,
Yeah.
it'll give you an error. But yeah.
Right.
So that's usually not the end. Like if you see, if things don't have a proper role, as it's called, that's what the accessibility term for that is. You can usually still do a couple of things. You can try still a few things to make sure that they still work, particularly if JAWS or NVIDIA says that they're clickable, because then you can click them and see what happens. If that doesn't work, yeah, you're host. It doesn't let you. You're done.
Right.
So yeah, that's the tricky bit. And if you get into that position, obviously find a different resource if you can. If you're in college, yeah, that's when the conversation with the Disability Services Department is in order, because they're gonna have to figure out some way to make you able to access that material, which will probably involve someone clicking buttons for you.
Yeah,
or
especially
describing
when
images.
it's a mandatory training.
Yeah,
Do it, you don't
that's
go
where
to
it gets
school.
tricky. Colleges can be very non-flexible
Yes.
in these things. So yeah, if that happens, it's difficult. You need to essentially really strongly advocate, like, look, you're making me do this thing that's inaccessible. That means that you're the problem, not me, and you can't pin this on me.
Yep, that's true.
Like I legit, and this is another anecdote about my college times. I had a teacher that I had a half an hour debate with about the fact that me and Photoshop may not be the most made in heaven combination ever. And he just could not grasp that. He did not have the logical circuits to understand that moving a mouse around on a picture without losing your eyes to see where you're actually going with it is a very difficult and very fruitless exercise.
Wow.
And yeah, I had to actually get the dean involved to get that exercise changed for me. Sometimes you really need to go up the chain and get someone who has a couple of brain cells to rub together to get the person who doesn't to see reason. It's unfortunate, but it's unfortunately the situation we often find ourselves in. I'm looking at the clock.
7:26 p.m.
Yeah, we have 5 more minutes. Okay, so sorry, we're gonna have to move on to another person before we leave a lot of people in the cold. Next question, if any.
Okay, I'm going to read a few from the chat just so that you are up to date. One person was just saying, cannot sign up for CAPTCHA, so cannot log into Discord.
Yeah, HCAPTCHA is annoying. Send me an email. I'll send you the instructions on how to, or I'll put them somewhere, but I'll send you instructions on how to get past it. At least I'll try. It's really, the way you do it is essentially there's a link in the HCAPTCHA thing that says learn more about accessibility. And then there's like a link to an accessibility sign up page. And then you fill your email address in there. And then it sends you an email. And then you click the link in the email. And then there's a button that says set accessibility cookie that you click. And then if you do the CAPTCHA again, it should work. And it's a ridiculously dumb process. And it should be fired, like bombed to infinity. And it's horrible. But yeah, Discord likes it and a lot of other people like it. And the problem is that they think that a lot of people like them. So they're not seeing reason in how convoluted that system is. But yeah, that's essentially how you do it. If you can't figure it out, yeah, send me an email and I'll write up exact instructions on how to do it.
Hey, maybe I missed it, but did you share your email or a way to contact you in case they needed
it? It's on the class website.
Perfect.
It's and contact me in the link. Contact me so you can basically go there.
Okay, and will a Discord server live after this course ends?
It's not costing me anything, so sure, I can stay up.
JAWS keeps losing focus all of the time while reading the notes.
That is strange. I'm not sure what to tell you there. It's very stupidly simple HTML, so that's probably your browser having a bit of an issue there. Does that happen to other pages or just mine? Because if it happens on just mine, I can look into it, but I'd be very surprised.
Next one, went to an HTML class from the library and they were using an inaccessible code editor online. So I switched into VS Code, but I didn't get access to the slides. I would have been completely lost if I didn't already know some HTML.
Yeah, that's another interesting one. So there's two, and I really need to start talking fast. I see.
7:29 p.m.
There's two ways this can go. Like there's usually an editor that's like embedded in the page. You can still read the information that's there, but you can't properly interact with the code. If that happens, what you do is you you press enter on the thing, so you have the focus mode on the editor, and then you just Control-A, Control-C the code out of the editor into a notepad window, for example, and then look at and make your changes there. And then if you need to make changes, you paste it back once you're done. If the entire course is in the editor, find a different course, because that's not conducive to helping. I'm not sure what library that was from, but yeah, that sounds bad. Also flag it, because they should have it be more accessible. And I'm good for staying a bit longer, but we have reached the end of our time.
7:29 p.m.
I see. So
So what I'm
thank you
going
all
to do
so
is-
much. And yeah, I'm completely cool with going on, but like I do want to respect people's time.
And one of the
Yeah,
first things
thank you. I'm
do is
gonna
let our-
just speak up for a moment and thank again our sponsor CDW for their generous grant support of this class. And if anyone has additional questions, it sounds like those are able to be asked at this time.
And
Yep.
I'm going
Thanks,
to let
everyone.
say thank you to our closed captionist and let her move on to her next timed event. So thank you so much.
Thank
a
you very
moment
much,
to do that.
Captioner.
Thank you, Captioner.
And then you do have a few more questions. You have Brian, you have another question? I think Brian is still stuck. How about David?
Brian, feel free to send your question in the Slido or the Discord after class if that's easier. I'll get to you. David.
Oh, wait a minute. Did I still have my hand?
There you go.
Yep,
You're
I
all
hear
now.
you, David.
Okay, cool. I wasn't sure. But yeah, I had a similar experience. Actually had the same argument that you were mentioning, but I had to explain to my teacher that I couldn't use a mouse, and he did seem to understand that. But the more serious one was that I got booted from a class because I couldn't draw a logic circuit, but I managed to get the assembly language program to work because it was the only part of the class for which I actually had a textbook.
Yeah.
So you could run into
college courses can be
weird
like
stuff.
yeah.
And the only reason I got the textbook was I actually went to the publisher myself, which you're not technically supposed to do because the college is supposed to do that for you, but I went to the publisher and said, do you have this textbook? Because I need it in a week. And they kindly sent me an e-text version of the thing. But
yeah, sounds like you did the right thing there.
If you ever need to do that, I eventually ended up having to get the entire staff of the college booted because they just weren't being. So if you have to get that extreme, you need the education. I just wanted to throw that out there because
at times it can really be necessary to put your foot down.
Good job on that. I
listen.
didn't think to copy and paste the thing out of a code editor. That's clever, right? I didn't realize you could often do that.
The only place where that's going to not work well is from memory, if they even still use that. This is several years old information, so take it as it is. But it was either Code School, which doesn't exist anymore. That's Pluralsight now. They were bought up, or it was Team Treehouse. But one of the two had a thing where you couldn't paste the entirety of the code back into the editor. There was like a part of the code that was editable, and then the rest wasn't. So you couldn't do this trick. You'd have to like, it was very, you'd have to figure out between like the two little arrow emoji, you had to figure out what bit of code that was, and you couldn't because you can't see what line you're on when you're arrowing. It was very annoying.
No, to put something a little more positive, the Microsoft code editor, like if you go to the Microsoft code tutorials for like C# and stuff like that, you can actually, they use like a fully functioning like rich text editor in the browser, and you can just bang out your code in the thing and watch it execute.
Yeah, that is what Monaco enabled sites will let you do as well. Codecademy uses the VS Code's editor, so does Free Code Camp, so does Educative.
Nice, cool.
So you can use all those
'Cause when I
platforms, and
first
they
tried
teach
those,
a
they
bunch
were
of things. They teach like machine learning. They teach all sorts of things. So, yeah.
Cool. No, because when I first tried them, they were completely inaccessible. So I may have to.
Yeah, this is something that was changed in the last 2 years.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I took some time off, and then when I saw they had the free course, I was like, yeah, I got to get back into programming because I really enjoyed it, and I've got plenty of time. So yeah, we're
Yeah.
getting there. Then this has been helpful because I was a little bit confused as to how to get started, and you helped figure out what I need to install, and so I can
Yeah,
make use
that
of
was the
programming
intent with this
textbooks
course.
again.
There's another course coming up soon, like in April. That's going to be a bit more code heavy. This course was really meant to like remove
Cool.
obstacles, get you
This is
started.
good times. Good times. Thank you. I'd like to thank the grant person too, because we needed something like this where people can learn actually how to deal with these weirdnesses that go on.
Right.
Job. Also, there's a good ethical hacking bundle that's on Audible that explains a lot of this as well. It comes with a PDF. It's like 40 hours of lectures if you're so
might check that
inclined.
out.
It takes you right through, like it starts with Python and then it takes you through like machine learning and then it goes all like into SQL and pretty much how to like it covers pretty much anything you'd need to crack things.
I'll check that out. Thanks.
I bumped into it and I thought I'd bring it up because you did say you did penetration testing and stuff. There might be some, it's probably stuff you already know, but it's a decent reference because it's like 40 hours of audio, so it's not bad.
40 hours of audio. Yeah, no, I'll definitely check that out. Thanks for the thanks
Big
for the
fat warning: if you don't speak Python, it would be terrible because the guy doesn't read the punctuation when he reads the code.
Yep. That's a really fun one, actually. That's a one we often see in videos for coding, is that people, if they narrate their code at all, which they often don't.
No, they haven't known there's.
But if they do narrate their code, there are a lot of punctuation will be missing, so you can't just take it like one-to-one. You have to like do a little bit of like, oh yeah, it means there's a parenthesis, this is a function, so there needs to be parentheses.
You kind of have to look at the syntax and figure like you have to know the language, but it can be a useful because he does get into how machine learning models work and this kind of thing, and you might get some useful info because the book is
feel free to put the link to that in like Slido or some other thing you can reach me at.
I'll dig it out from my library.
Got 4 more questions. Can we get to those?
Yeah,
guys?
sure.
Yeah,
okay.
That's why
I just want to make sure.
I didn't mean to blather so much. I'm terribly sorry.
All good. Okay, let's continue.
Okay, Arquam.
Who else?
Arquam.
Hey everyone, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so I have a question. The question is, in Visual Studio Code, do we have an option like, for example, let's suppose we have a function called time.sleep, and I'm just curious about what is time.sleep. So like completely I know like help function and stuff, but what if I want to like in actually what I'm asking because in Visual Studio I was in Visual Studio and there is an option called peak definition. So for example, if you know about this, so you will get my point.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So there is a function, there is a thing called peak definition in VS Code as well. I have found that it doesn't always work, and I haven't quite pinned down why not yet. So I'm going to look into that for you and let you know once I figure out what the limitations
if you can if you can look at for me, because I Google it, but I could not find anything anyways. But because I like this function, like I like this option very much.
Yeah,
and
it's very useful even in like your own code. So yeah, I'll look into that for you. And
for example,
let you
if
know
you
next
have
week.
a big project going on, and so you have a huge code in different files, so sometimes you will not be able to you should know where this line of code is coming from. So
It's
you
coming from, and
can dig
yeah,
into the
exactly.
code. So
I'm
if,
I'm gonna look it up for you.
yeah, thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, we've got Cameron.
I just wanted to say that I found like the I'm not a robot like reCAPTCHA challenges. They're very inaccessible with screen readers because they don't describe what the pictures are. They have to move
there
around.
is like, I must say that the reCAPTCHA ones are least annoying of the bunch, because usually when you check them with Chrome, at least you'll get an instant check. With Edge most of the time, and then when it doesn't, and you are not hard of hearing, you can still get an audio challenge as well most of the time. But yeah, if you're completely locked out and you have to do the visual ones, then you're hosed, because yeah, there is no way to look at which ones are the traffic lights. And you can't
Yeah,
figure
I
out which
just
ones
wanted to
press,
say that
so.
I found those to be very inaccessible on multiple devices.
Yeah,
I know we were talking about that earlier.
Very true. Yeah.
And then we have Evan.
Evan.
So 2 quick questions. I missed the command on how to the OCR command for JAWS.
Ooh, that's a good one. It's one of those layered commands. So it's insert space, and then I think it's either R or O. No, O, I think. Or R is something else.
It's O.
Yeah, it's O. Thanks. Yeah, it's O for RCRing the current window, I think. Yeah.
Okay, insert space and then O. Okay. And the second question, kind of off topic, but accessing this, like in DevTools, when I'm trying to access some of the code, it only shows part of it on JAWS. I know at NVDA, if you hit Control U, it expands the whole window. It expands all the code, but would you happen to, like offhand, JAWS
Control U does view source, and then when you're in focus mode, you can do Control A, Control C to copy it somewhere else. But you should be able to just scroll through. At least with NVDA, you usually get a big table that has all the lines of code in it for the entire thing. The thing is, that is the code as it was when the page was first loaded. Now, in a lot of pages these days, JavaScript will modify that code quite a bit, and you're not going to see those modifications in a Control U. So what you want to do instead is, if you're looking for a particular element, you'd want to use inspect element instead and use the DOM tree in the DevTools to go through for the code. It's a bit more cumbersome, but that is the most up-to-date representation.
For like some like the JavaScript or the Python, or even the CSS?
That's for the HTML, CSS. You're not going to see the JavaScript a lot of the time, not all of it at least. And a lot of it, when you do see it, it's like obfuscated, so you don't really know what it's doing.
Right. So I meant more like, because I know in DevTools, you can go to like the source area and look at the script that they wrote for the JavaScript or the Python. But for me, when I go in there, it just only shows part of it because I'm using JAWS. But I know it may not be Control U. There's another command for NVDA that lets you expand the whole thing. I don't know how to do that for JAWS.
I'd have to. You can hop on the Discord and we'll look into it.
Okay, thank you.
And last question in the chat: how do we draw a GUI containing common tools, at least like text and checkboxes, radio buttons?
Very laboriously. So there are several ways to do it. In Python, you have a library called WX-Python, which is a way to draw native widgets on the screen. So that's when you make your buttons and your edit fields and your radio buttons and things. It can be a little bit difficult for a blind person to figure out if they're like looking right, if that makes sense, if you have them properly aligned and everything. And every language has its own sort of way of doing this. For example, C#, that is one of the languages you'd use in regular Visual Studio. You would use something called XAML to do this, which is very similar to HTML, which we'll be covering next week. But and then Electron.js applications, the ones, for example, like Discord and Visual Studio, they use web technology, so HTML, CSS to do this. And then you just have essentially a web page where all these buttons and controls are. So it really depends on what project you're working on and what modality you're working on. But yeah, on Python, your best bet by far is a library called WX Python to do that.
Evan, do you still have a question, or is your hand accidentally still up?
Sorry, I just
Okay, just make sure. Okay, that is all your questions, and we're down definitely more than half of our group. So I will say thank you. I'm sure Ty says thank you again, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thanks for everyone for the attention. I'll get working on those notes, and yeah, see you next week.